Impermanence and Death. One may think that because one possesses such a wonderful opportunity for Dharma practice, one can approach it in a very leisurely way. First of all, concentrating on achieving worldly ends, and then later on in one's life turning into Dharma practice. This is a profoundly mistaken view, because the one thing which is certain about any situation in samsara is its impermanence. Lord Buddha said, "The palaces of impermanence arise and disappear together with their inhabitants." In order to remedy this defect of complacency, as well as the major problem of attachment to this life, we need to meditate on impermanence. According to the tradition, this should be done by contemplating three particular aspects: the certainty of death, the uncertainty of the time when death will occur, the uselessness of anything apart from Dharma at the time of death. Under these three headings, we contemplate impermanence in such a way that it becomes to us not just a theory, something we can assent to intellectually, but a reality that we feel in the very core of our heart. Only in this way will our perspectives alter radically. At the present time, as we saw above, our actions are driven by worldly goals, the 8 worldly dharmas. Even though on the outside we may be officially a religious practitioner, or even convince ourselves of this is so, inside we are no different from any worldly person. The certainty of death. Consider the certainty of death in the following ways. Death is certain to befall us all, because there is nobody in history who has ever avoided this fate. Like so many blindingly obvious things, we spend all our lives avoiding having to look this fact in the face. Given no one can escape this fate, then how can it possibly be that we are exempt from it? Nevertheless, in some ways we have pretended to ourselves that we are, but we live on a planet which is a graveyard of all sentient beings who have been here before, with the number of dead far outweighing the number of living. Moreover, whatever the characteristics of these different people, are all subject to death. So there is no type of human being we might aspire to be which will enable us to avoid death. Even the most powerful of human beings, people who have conquered huge territories or gained great success in many worldly things, have all had to surrender their power or possessions and go alone to face death. Not only do kings and emperors have to face death, but so do the spiritually powerful, the great saints of the past, whose names are recited in the very prayer to the masters of the Zenfa Zirodal lineage, have all passed away with the exception of my own root Lama. Even the Buddha himself passed away at Kushingara at the age of 80 in order to inculcate in us all, his followers, a sense of the certainty of death. So if it is the case that death occurs to everybody, even up to and including the Buddha's physical body, then it is certain to befall myself. I am no exception. No matter what age I am at this moment, death is certain sooner or later to befall me. Consider the certainty of death in another way. What it is that constitutes my life? The answer is that it is a temporary fusion of various phenomena. To be specific, the stream of consciousness coming together with the sperm and ovum provided by my parents. This coming together of otherwise discrete phenomena clearly underlines the contingency of my possession of life. It brings home there is nothing solid or indivisible about my possession of life. Lord Buddha said that everything comes together, falls apart, and so it will be that with this life that I possess now. These temporarily fused but discrete phenomena Someday we'll separate. My mind will leave this temporary shelter of the body and travel on. As Galsi Thongwa says, someday the mind departs the body like a guest departs a hotel. This physical shelter for mind will also disperse and return to its constituent elements. It will be burnt and scat. It will be burnt and scattered to the wind or buried in the earth. So whilst I imagine my life as a solid, indestructible entity, it is actually as contingent as anything else in this world. Looking into my mind and body and seeing how they have come together, I am led to wonder how I can believe that I will last forever. They were not there in the beginning, and they will not be there in the end. One can penetrate very deeply into one's physical form to look for anything solid. One will then realise what a complex organism representing so many different factors and substances one bodies is. Yet upon this tremendously intricate temporary phenomenon, one is resting all one's hopes and dreams on permanence. Finally, to understand the certainty of death, one should see how always one's life is moving towards its end. Never standing still, oneself and everything else is continually moving forward and onward. In our own case, we are moving towards the inevitability of death. It is said in the teachings that one's life is like an arrow shot from a bow. Some arrows fly very far into the sky, some virtually no distance at all, but eventually any arrow will descend to earth. Similarly, with our life, from the moment of our conception, we are like an arrow in flight which is bound to fall to the ground. In one sutra it says, some die while they are still in the womb, some die on just being born, some die while just crawling, some die when they are in the prime of youth, and some die when they are old, but all will die. Like the fully ripened fruit, one by one they go. Those of us who are older can see that the early part of our life passed just like the images in a dream, like something which happened in the flickering of an eyelid. Our life is like water rushing over a precipice. For a brief instant we imagine we can avoid looking at the precipice and think that the stream of our life will continue forever. But that moment will pass. Then we will be confronted with the reality of death. Truly, therefore, to be born and conceived is to be under the sentence of death. We may rejoice at the idea of birth, but if we do so, we should also logically rejoice in death. Consider again these 3 points. Nobody in history has avoided death. Death is certain because our life is a compound phenomenon, and our life is always moving towards its conclusion. How can we go on avoiding dealing with this certainty, this absolutely central fact of our existence? How is it that we avoid looking into the face of death, yet this is what we must continually do, because otherwise the things that matter so much to us would not do so. Gone would be the importance of our unusual preoccupations, worries and goals, with all the consequent neurosis and suffering that such obsessions bring. As Shantideva so compassionately puts, it is in the Botsuwatikavakadikatara. Some evil and lustful people wear themselves out by working when they come home. They have to lie prostrate like corpses. In other words, we worldly people spend all our time trying to gather something which is so useless to us in the light of the certainty of death. We do not live in a bubble that protects us from it, and there is nothing different about us that would exempt us. We are part of the stream of birth and death in a fragile, ever-changing world. It is not as if we have a steel body which will never rust or corrode. We underestimate our fragility. civilizations, cities, and all the complexity of human culture may have encouraged us to believe we are in some way different beings from the creatures of the field. But ultimately our lives are still just as fragile as theirs. They and we are certain to die. The uncertainty of the time when death will occur. Now we may finally take this certainty to heart and fully accept its truth. But still our ambitions may not be silenced by accepting the certainty of death, because we may assure ourselves it is going to occur to us at some distant point in the future. Therefore I still have the room to pursue the desirable things of this life, because I can turn to Dharma practice much later on, perhaps when I am not so dynamic and attractive. The only drawback with this is there is no certainty of when death will befall me. The second major point to consider: death is certain, but its time is not. We must take on board this absence of any certainty about when death will occur. As Shantideva says in the Bodhisattva, why am I still not aware that I live in the mouth of the Lord of Death? The only certainty, our only resting ground, is in the present moment. The teaching of impermanence is designed to bring home to us this reality. If we accept the inevitability of death, but at the same time defer it intellectually to some later date, we still have not realized the value of the present moment, and therefore the preciousness of our human existence it contains. One might ask, why is the time of death uncertain? Firstly, the span of life is not fixed for human beings. As we saw earlier, some die in the womb, some die when they are crawling, some die in the prime of youth, and some die when they are old. Nevertheless, there is nothing which guarantees human beings a fixed span of life, precisely where there are so many factors involved in sustaining it. Secondly, the time of death is not certain because there are so many factors that can cause death. This is much easier to see in the countryside. Look how fragile it is to insects in the field, yet how much more solid it is for us than for these beings. In our cities we imagine we are protected by the technological trappings of our culture. But with all that, this body is a very fragile thing. We need to remind ourselves we are part of the natural world and all its consequent fragility. Just a slight change in environmental conditions mean we can perish. Even the stars and planets are not solid and permanent, but will eventually be destroyed. So how much more is it the case for this fragile body of mine? As Nagarjuna says in the friendly letter, since not even ash will remain as all things, the earth, Mount Meru, and the oceans will be consumed by the flames of the 7 suns. What need to say anything of the very frail humans? What is more, if natural causes of death were not enough, we humans have invented many more for each other with our science and technology. In some ways, therefore, life is even more dangerous than it was before. We need to remind ourselves that we are part of the natural world and all its consequent fragility. Conversely, while there are so many causes of death, it is sadly the case that there are not many causes of sustaining life. There are relatively few things which support our life and compassion, but the many things which threaten it. What are normally life-sustaining factors, such as food and medicine, can become detrimental or even fatal. Food poisoning, accidents, or even insignificant illnesses can be instrumental in carrying people off. Even in the prime of life or youth, where is the permanent guarantee that we will all live for a certain number of years? One can fall prey to death at any time. As Nagarjuna says in the friendly letter, life is impermanent since it is beset by many misfortunes, like a bubble of water caught by the wind that one inhales after exhaling and awakens from sleep, is wonderful. No one has guaranteed that this fragile life has to last for a certain amount of time. Even when we breathe out, there is no guarantee that we must breathe in again. By taking so many things for granted, we are so careless and unregarding of the preciousness of our life and of this present moment. We sleep and dream through most of our life, entertaining ourselves with fantasies of what we will become or achieve, what we'll say to this person or do to that person. The point is that our life is rushing by, and so we must seize this present moment. It is not that we should consider impermanence and death in order to become gloomy. On the contrary, there is something truly gloomy about spending our life in dreams and fantasies, and something completely wonderful about being awake to the present moment, through knowing this is the only certainty. We have no more to be sure of than this. So the Buddha's teaching on impermanence is like a drum being beaten when people are still asleep, exhorting us to wake up to this wonder of the present moment.